Namaste and in la catch, and welcome to this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and as always, and I hope you never get tired of this, Namaste and in la catch come from two ancient languages that encourage us all to step up and be who we are. Namaste comes from the Sanskrit, spoken it's Brahmi, and it means the divine in me recognizes the divine in you. In la catch comes from the Mayan civilization, and it means I am another you. So here's two civilizations from the opposite sides of the world saying pretty much the same thing. Do you think there's truth in that? I don't know. Test it for yourself. Don't believe me. Try it on. View the world, view others from that perspective when you meet them, and see what happens. I dare you. Thanks so much. All right, so this week's episode, our guest is Sunny Job. He's called a fear elimination ninja. So this ought to be really interesting. He says he helps achievers crush the fears and unblock their life in one conversation. This ought to be cool. I don't know if my life needs to be unblocked or not, but who knows? We'll see. So he's the owner and hypnotherapist, life coach at Unblocked Life. In his history, though, he's been a training general manager for George Associates. He's also been the business head of ARI Fragrances, and he is a training manager was training manager in talent development for Aon Hewitt. He's also a graduate of the Dale Carnegie Train the Trainer, and he's a graduate of the Wellinger School of Management from Mumbai. Welcome, Sunny.
Namaste, Zen. That was quite a big introduction. Thank you.
Well, you're a big person. We're all big people, right?
Mm-hmm.
We need to stop playing the little game.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So, speaking of little game, when you were little, I know there had to be some things, especially in India. I mean, India is known as its richness for its spiritual essence and the way people live, right? So in your young life, what did you find out? How did you experience your connection with that? Because even though things are all around us, it takes the personal investigation and dive in to actually get a visceral experience of it. When did that occur, and how did it occur?
Oh, well, wow, that you've taken me many years into the past. So I was born in Mumbai, in one of the lowliest places you could say, in the slums. And being born a Roman Catholic, the access and connection to the divine was mostly through guilt for me. Feeling
Guilt
guilty.
intercessors, right?
Yeah. Yeah, feeling guilty about just my identity as a human being, because you're born in sin, right? I suppose one of the first memories for me of experiencing something completely extraordinary and unbelievable was when I was 15. The house that we were living in that slum, long story cut short, there was a whole court case on that, and we had to be evicted from that house. So that night, next morning we were supposed to be evicted. The previous night, we were all sitting inside the house and with no idea where we would go, because my parents had spent pretty much all their savings, including their retirement funds, for fighting the court case for that house. So the lawyers were paid very well, but we didn't have the house, and there was no plan B where to go. My mother was sitting there and contemplating to mix some sort of a rat poison into the rice and give it to us without telling us. And it so happens that one of our family friends just walks in late that evening. Next morning, the cops are supposed to come and evict us. So he comes late evening, hands over the keys to a flat, an apartment, and says, all of the rent has been paid for the whole 1 year. I know you don't have the cash to pay me right now. Don't worry about it. When you go and stay there, start paying me on a monthly basis. There's no interest, no nothing. Just pay me the amount that I've paid. It's not charity. Don't worry about this. Take these keys and shift your children, everybody there. And this
Wow.
yeah, my parents were like, what? And so obviously they happened to ask him, like, how did you know? And like, why did you take this drastic step? So he said that he had a voice in his head say that he needs to do this, and he didn't question it twice. So he just went right ahead, found the flat, first of all, hunted for a place, paid the money, signed the contract, and then comes and just gives us the key right in our hands. It's etched so deeply in my mind when it comes to ever doubting about my survival or what kind of roof will I have on my head, clothes or food in my belly. I think this is one of the strongest evidence for me that even if we haven't figured it out, everything is figured out. So just trust. Right. So that was for me one of the first
Exactly.
experiences. Yeah.
Now, isn't that now speaking of the trust, and when you're thinking about these kinds of things, they seem to happen. I call it the thoughtmosphere. You can call it consciousness. You can call it the one mind. You can call it the non-local mind. There's all kinds of names that we ascribe to this, right?
Labels. Yeah.
Yeah, and all of them diminish it.
Yep.
Right?
I agree.
Because it's infinite, and the kinds of connections that happen seem so outrageously bizarre in the moment, and yet perfectly synchronistic, as though they were orchestrated by some, for lack of a better, divine conductor.
Yes.
Right. Now, how do you think that happens?
Well, I think it's the connection. Everything is connected. And I suppose people, whether they believe it or not, it's not dependent on our levels of belief. It just comes through when we allow it, when a person is in a space to allow it. The person who came with those keys, I don't see him as a highly spiritual person or being in some kind of practice, but the connection that we all share, that the space that we all share, it has access to all of us. It's just
Absolutely.
does its magic and runs right through us.
And I think the misunderstanding is that we have to be pious and super religious or spiritual or whatever. And that's not necessarily the case. All we got to do is pay attention. It's in and through each of us. There's no distinction. There's no prescriptive path that we have to take in order to achieve the ear that's able to hear it. It's there. All we have to do is acknowledge, be aware, and act upon, right? I call it it's where your focus of attention, intention, and interaction is that really makes the world and your life incredible. Just incredible.
I so agree. And here's why I started off my this conversation speaking about the conditioning that we all have. Being so, conditioning refers to the stories that are being told to us, and when we are that young, we're not thinking. So we're not thinking clearly. At least I wasn't. So the
We're
idea
wanting
of
to listen
divine
to
was
those older, wiser, more intelligent, we think,
yeah.
right? Because that's what we're taught. Our elders, our leaders, especially our parents, they're God and goddess to us.
Yeah.
Right.
True.
So in that place, we have first of all have to acknowledge that yes, there's that deep connection with our nuclear family. First of all, what about the connection with the rest of the family? And like your instance of okay, this guy heard a voice and who knows where it came from. The fact is that it came. So why do we gotta define? I was interviewed recently as because I've heard voices my entire life, and they say, well, you've ever tried asked who they are or where they come from? Why?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. It goes back to that trust thing that when you start listening and it starts proving itself, you don't need to know. It's like that's that part of you that's connected to everything. And how could everything have a name?
Yeah. And isn't it funny, Zen, that all of us, most of humanity is listening to voices in their heads, oftentimes not the helpful one.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Right. What is it in the meditation circles? We call it the monkey mind. Right? The internal dialogue is what Carlos Castaneda call it from Don Juan. And,
Mm.
you know, part of being able to, well, let me ask you this. How do you determine what that voice is? How do you find a way to listen and discern in that process? How did that come when in early life? We'll get to the later. We're still looking at, okay, where'd we start, right?
Yeah. The early life, I would say, it's the voice that doesn't condemn. I mean, that's how I see it as. And for me, if I go back to my childhood, I didn't really have voices in my head or a clarity the way a lot of people may, spiritual people may talk about, but I had a sense of feeling, the sense of protection and comfort and feeling of being whole. When I had that feeling, I knew that I'm going in the right direction. It's something which is helping me.
Mhm.
But the
So it
other
was a visceral
voice,
experience then. It wasn't
yeah,
something that you imagined or
hmm,
thought. It
hmm,
actually resided in your body.
yeah,
Now
yeah,
that's an interesting distinction, because I know in the Western world, most of us live from our shoulders up. We aren't aware of the body being an instrument, let alone we can tune it and play in concert, right?
hmm,
We're following these prescriptive ideals and narratives that we're told of how to live and why to live and who's important and who to follow and all that kind of stuff, instead of relying on ourselves.
hmm, yeah.
So in that process, how did you learn more to rely on that visceral sensation?
Um, it, I remember doing the things that were completely different from the rest of my family. For the rest of my family, it was about, why don't you just go to school and study? And for me, it was, I'll go to school and study, and I will do my extracurricular activities, and I will do the things that bring me joy, which was going and participating in singing competitions or playing football. I mean, I started playing football when I was 12 years old. This is soccer I'm talking about, right?
Mhm.
So, and I played all the way till the end of my university education. So, nobody in my family has played soccer, like no one. There's no reference of that. So where did that come from? Just joy. I
Your
followed my
desire,
joy.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
And the why not?
Why not? Yeah. And that meant, because in India, when you're playing inter-school and inter-college soccer, you're playing it in monsoon, because I'm from that part of India which rains pretty
Mhm.
heavy over here. I'm on the island, right, Mumbai. So it used to get all mucky and completely dirty. And my mother would just put her hands up saying, and we didn't have washing machine back in those days. So do it yourself. And she's like, just do it yourself. You're going to wash your own clothes. I'm not going to get involved. And I was okay. I
Dive in the
play.
river afterwards, huh?
Yeah, yeah. I was okay doing all of that thing, play, come back, wash. So it was just following my joy in simple things. Having said that, I suppose there was this whole incident, in my childhood where you could say that it could be called something sort of a sexual awakening, in the sense around the age of 10 or 11. It was more I wouldn't really say in a more pleasant or the nourishing way, but more of an abusive way, which kind of sort of disconnected me from this feeling more and more.
Mhm.
And when I could find connection with these things, but not really spirituality, but doing these things that brought me joy. So it was singing that would bring me back into that connection, or being on the field, smelling the grass and being close to the ground, that would put me back into that connected space, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, totally. I played sports through high school. I was kind of like
Hmm.
you. Um, Parents, I was pretty intelligent. Didn't have to study too hard, picked things up really easy. Star athlete. I ran a 4.340 in
Whoa.
football, so that's pro speed, but my legs are too short. I couldn't maintain it much longer than that, right? My best time in a 100-yard dash was 11:1. Um, but
Wow.
still quick enough. And so there were those kinds of things. I traveled, I had no social circles that I didn't investigate, right? I wasn't one of
Mhm.
those that just ignored people. I wanted to know everybody, and I would go everywhere. And I caught flack for that too, right? And yet they're all people, right? We're
Yeah.
all people. Why can't we learn to get along, right? And we're facing that right now. And this is where, um, like you're saying, when you're younger, you have that feeling of connectedness. So let's progress a little bit. And how did you find that, especially in the work that you did as a talent and training manager? That's pretty, especially when you're dealing with what 2,500, 3,000 people over
Yeah.
time, and even more. So that's a really important place to be in, and worthy of note, because it is. How did you bring that connection into that work? And what did you notice from others in the process?
It's an interesting question. So the whole process of getting into training itself was a huge shift for me. I had pretty much given up on getting into training. I was neck deep into the business side of the operations side of the business.
Mhm.
And when the application came through, and this is where, again, I've seen miracles in my life and these sort of things. Um, Smack in that time, I was in a pretty dark place, Zen, like and this is I see it as a gift now, looking back in retrospect, because when it came to exploring my darker, kinkier sides, I think I have been honest with myself in those areas. Maybe not honest with people around me, but with myself. When I chose certain things, I was with those things. And I was in that space where there's a lot of condemnation from outside, the moral condemnation about my choices. Um, and this opportunity comes through. Um, there were only two positions that were available. There were 14 people who are applying for these positions. This is India we're talking about, and there's a great fight whenever these vertical horizontal shifts come, right?
Sure. I'm surprised it was only 14.
Yeah, 14 of them. So out of the 14, um, only two people who applied were not managers. Everybody else had teams under them working. So they were managerial level candidates, and all of them, bar one, that was me, were trained as trainers by the same training team who was hiring for these positions. So I was the only one who was not trained as a trainer.
Interesting.
Okay. And I just saw that application come through in my email, and I thought, you know what, forget this. It's not going to work out. Delete. So I deleted that email. And one of my friends said, "Are you crazy? Just apply." And I
Why
had become
not?
eligible to apply only just 4 months before the actual thing came through. She said, "You're eligible, just apply." And she was one of the persons who also applied for the
Mhm.
position. And here's the interesting thing. My reporting manager back in the day, whose team I was in, he also applied along with me. So uh, there were about 4 rounds. We went through one by one, and I just kept going. Now, to answer your question, how did I get to this? Again, the connection was just focus. Oftentimes people have these ideas that connection is you have to sit there and meditate for many hours. I feel we can start where we are. And for me,
It's
being in that,
instantaneous.
yeah, being in
You
that
ask the
dark
question,
space.
you're available for the answer. You just got to
Yeah,
get out of your own way to do so.
exactly. And for me, it was putting on hold everything I was doing and just bringing all of my attention on this. I need to get out of this place. I want to get into that position, and I'm going to do everything. This is my one shot. I'm going to take this shot and do everything I can to get there. So after work, I would sit and just prepare. I would drag my colleagues and friends into one training room and I would give them mock training, just sit there and listen to what I'm saying, give me feedback or whatever. And these guys would pretend to be my trainees and kind of give me feedback and engage.
But you made the extra
This,
effort to do so,
yeah,
right?
this is the thing, right?
Right.
Right. So the connection comes through the flow, getting into the flow, and really pushed myself hard. Long story short, I got that position. Only two people made it. One of them was my reporting manager back then,
Mm-hmm.
and myself. And then overnight, my reporting manager became my equal colleague. And right, both of us became training managers, and now we were just colleagues. And so that was the thing. To answer
You
your
started to go,
question,
I saw a look in your eyes. It's like, okay, now that's a place that's really rich too in making that transition
yeah.
from having an unequal position to now being equals. What was that like? Because there's a lot of people, especially now with remote working and all these kinds of workplace shifts that are
Mhm.
going through this process, and egos are ruffled.
Yeah.
Right. So how did that work out? What were the kinds of things that obviously both of you probably noticed? And being in the training industry myself for a number of years, there's a really high level of integrity and willingness to be open and vulnerable to what you're going through personally.
Yeah.
And sharing.
Yeah.
So how did that take place?
Yeah, I think the transition was not very difficult for both of us, although we did share sort of a love-hate relationship while I was in his team reporting to him. We had our differences as well. But once we made it to the team, and just a few times where I had to draw my boundaries clearly that, hey, this is no reporting manager and reportee anymore. We are colleagues. And that was it. And I suppose even today we keep in touch, he and I, and we have a good rapport. So I think we did cover a good ground in a short span of time. He himself was going through quite a difficult period with his spouse passing away and him having to take care of twins by himself.
Oh my gosh,
So that
that
was quite a
sounds
transition
tough.
for him.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And how do you look at life when that's happening, right? And it's excruciating for others. And not only that, we've had a whole transition over the last couple of years of a lot of people going through that for various reasons, whether it's directly related or ancillary effects. The fact is that there's been a kind of a wave, if you will, and it's not a friendly one, right? Or maybe it is, right?
Yeah.
Because we tend to look at things in a very physical, unidimensional, linear way, and life just isn't that.
It isn't.
No matter how hard we try to make it so, right? In that process, and so in moving through this, recognizing the predicament that he was in, your training, how did that relationship grow and mature in how you guys work with each other? Because I think, and what I want to stress here is the importance of learning how to work together better, because you're all focused on a common goal rather than a personal agenda.
Yeah. I would say we turned into a bunch of tag team partners. We started doing our work together. He was good with reports, and then he took that up as a senior person who had been managing a team. He could do dashboards pretty well, so he was stepping up and doing that bit. And he allowed me to take the front row and get into training because I needed more hours of training under my belt. So that kind of worked out quite in a complementary way. So,
Now, what
and the
about the
rest
fear
was
of
just
public
communication.
speaking, right? That is the top ranked fear, even above death and divorce, right? So were these things that he recognized in you that you had less challenges with getting up in front of people, or maybe not less challenges, but the ability to actually work through them and go do it anyway?
Well, two things. What worked out in my favor was that I was in a band even back in my college days and post my college years. So facing people from a stage, from a slide, from a podium was not a problem for me,
Mm-hmm.
and expressing myself was never a challenge. Um, and the second thing is, while I was in training in that department, I also had access to start getting into a club like Toastmasters International. So
Awesome
yeah,
organization.
yeah. So had a great time going through the whole first module, and you finishing off the competent communicator module by itself, finishing off the first 10 speeches. So that kind of gave me insight into public speaking, practical hands-on experience, and how to go about
Right.
doing that. So that helped a lot.
Now, were there any engagements that there was another, since you mentioned Toastmasters, there's another corporate training support organization at that time, I think it was called the American Society for Training and Development. It's now the Association for Talent Development. I think the ASTD kind of got them after the STDs started coming out, right? Just, it's a funny phrase, right? And the loose association of it just really didn't have that great of message. Anyway, the question was, did you deal with that organization as well? Because that's more corporate focused.
Yes.
Okay, so it's a wonderful. I was actually on the board of directors for our Arizona chapter for a few years, put together their annual conference. We called it the Shift Challenge to Change, Removing Liabilities, Limitations, and Excuses in the Workplace. And it was funny how we came up with it. I heard the phrase challenge to change in one of my master's programs. And the fact that there's only 3 letters difference is kind of gets your attention, right? And so that leaves the LLE, because you take the LLE out of challenge and you get change. And so and I'm one of these kids still that can't hold back in the classroom, right? So I piped up right away. Liabilities, limitations, and excuses just came out of my mouth. Didn't even think about it. And so in putting together the conference, talking about things happening out of nowhere, I get a phone call from a past president of the Arizona chapter for National Speakers Association. And he says, "Hey, Zan, I hear you're doing the conference this year for ASTD. How can I help?" And I'm like, "How did you hear?" Right? It was like 2 weeks after I accepted the role, president-elect. It's the role that had that responsibility. And I said, "Well, I got an idea that I've been running around my head. I'm not sure if it'd work or not." He says, "Well, what is it? Tell me." And so I gave him that notion, and he says, "Brilliant, let's do it." And so we launched it, and it really made so much sense and was one of the best conferences that they had in over a decade. Was the feedback that we got. So those kinds of things are important, to be able to look at the personal as well as the professional liabilities, limitations, and excuses that we have, and just say, well, why not? Like you did, right? You had the encouragement of a friend, which is similar to what I had from this gentleman. And those things, those little moments, can mean a lifetime of difference.
Yeah. And you know what is important, what you just said? You were not thinking.
Yeah.
It just came out of nowhere while you were not thinking.
And it's, that always reminds me when we talk about thinking, I'm reminded of Einstein's statement of, you can't solve the problems with the same thinking that created them.
Yes.
And it's so interesting. This gives so what about thinking? What about the linear? You've explored nonlinear and non-local thinking. What is that to you? How does that roll out? What is it? What's the meaning of it? What might have been an experience of it that you could illustrate, so that our audience kind of get a better grasp on what that really is and means? and maybe be
All,
able to experience it for themselves, right?
yeah. Then I'm still exploring it. I would say, I wouldn't just say
I
I've
don't know that we
explored
ever
it.
stop, right?
Yeah, exactly. Um, so the thing is that in my experience, what I've seen is that we are, as I see myself, I'm just a channel here, and the intelligence that there is, and I can't put a name to it, like you said, known labels to it.
Mhm.
It uses all of the vocabulary and experiences and context that I have had throughout my experience, all the whole spectrum of
There's a
experience,
database.
the database, the whole spectrum, right? From the excruciating fun to the pleasures and ecstasy, all of that. And the more I stop thinking and more I just let go, but with the intention. And where does the intention come from? Again, it's just popping out of nowhere. It's just, there is an intention. It's like, you get impregnated by an intention. It's just there, and you set that intention, say, okay, this is what I want to share, not my will, thy will be done. And dropping into that zone where thoughts are relaxed and I am relaxed, my nervous system is at rest, and just going boldly and just opening my mouth and letting my
Where no
expression come
man's
out.
gone before, right?
Yeah. And
Little Star
this
Trek
is,
there.
yeah, just letting it go. And to date, when I look at my own lives, when I do live sessions on Instagram or Facebook, I go back and I check, I'm like, holy crap, where did that come from? Like, I have, I've sometimes had to watch myself tries to kind of just, okay,
Yeah, I actually wrote that. What do I, yeah, I've had similar
did I
things.
just say that?
Right,
Yeah.
right. I've got she's passed now, wonderful, dear friend from Canada. Her
Mm,
name was Winifred Barton. She was
mm-hmm,
um, nearly 40 years my senior.
mm-hmm,
And we used to correspond, and she would
mm.
wait 4, 5, 6 years and then send one of my emails back to me. And I'd be and I'd think it was a new post from her. I'd be reading it and I'm like, this is pretty cool, not recognizing my own writing till I get the end of it. And I was, oh shit, I wrote that. Wow, how'd that happen? Right. And yet it did.
Yeah.
Right. So in this, so that's an example of maybe the nonlinear
Yeah.
stuff, and somewhat the non-local. When you open up, you called yourself a channel, right? And you can tune the dial to your own personal frequency and just get out of the way. What is striking to me, especially in my recent history as well, and stepping into the executive director role for
Mm,
Live Global Peace Movement and Foundation, those two, it was kind of funny to begin with, the two rules that Mark Victor presents, and as a lawyer, right, he's the federal defense attorney, so he's got to deal with rules the whole time.
mm-hmm,
So he made it
mm-hmm.
simple. There's two: don't be an aggressor and be a good human.
Yeah.
Right? Don't be aggressor means don't aggress on yourself as well as others, because that's
Mm-hmm,
where that uncomfort comes, that self-denial and others denial, right?
mm-hmm,
And then as well as the actual aggression towards them, not a good
mm,
thing towards anybody, from government to individuals. Then the be a good human side of it, that's where you're talking, in my opinion, of the natural essence within us that just knows how to be, right?
mm-hmm.
That we cover up with all this thinking about how we should be. And of course, you remember the old adage, right? Don't shit on yourself. Not good.
Yeah.
And that's part of the indicators of when you're thinking that way, hit the pause button and stop back and start reflecting on why you're doing that and what's a better route to take. Now, how
Mm-hmm.
did you find that better route to take from going through the talent management into the further life service, if you will, and larger picture that you saw yourself in, and then the ascent into that?
Well, I think a major differentiator has been the pandemic, the lockdown. Um, I I mean, I had set up a business. I mean, in 2018, I was heading the business development for ARI fragrances, as you introduced me.
Hmm.
It did pretty well. In 2 years' time. We were getting to a point where we went past the break-even point and doing pretty well. And that month, when the lockdown hit, the whole invoicing just came to a standstill. This is more of a subscription invoicing. So
Right.
all subscriptions kind of came to a halt because corporations went on a halt. And the first 10 days, I had nothing to do. I could not talk to my clients, could not talk to my vendors, couldn't talk to anybody. So isolated, and being in the sort of arrangement of relationship that I was in, we were anyways distanced and living in our own bubble, so to speak.
Hmm.
So proper isolation. And what did I turn to? And this is not a long time ago. If you think about it, in pandemic, I can't relate with that person anymore. But here's what I was doing for the first 10 days. I was sitting with, in one hand, I had my rum and Coke, and in the other hand, I had my joint. And for the first 10 days, this is what I'm doing, just looking at Netflix and consuming all sorts of content. uh, there's so much going on in the world, and I'm tuning out from everything by getting into this virtual reality bubble of my own, so to speak.
Hmm.
And
But you're not
somewhere
the only
in
one
that,
that did that.
yeah, I realize that now I'm having these conversations with amazing people around the world, saying this is exactly what happened to them in their own context, of course. And 10 days into the whole show, I'm just scrolling again. I have my Coke and rum in one hand and my joint in another hand, and I'm scrolling through Netflix, thinking about what to watch next. And there's this time I'm hearing a voice. All my life I've been having these feelings. This time I have this voice in my head, and this is not the voice of my head. I know that voice in my head.
Hmm.
It has been judgmental and pretty horrible. This voice, in a very gentle way, put it, so if this lockdown does not end, like ever end, is this how you plan to spend the rest of your life? That's it. And there was no repeat, there was no
Yeah,
clarification. That's it.
unnecessary, right? That's pretty profound.
Yeah. And I'm going like, what? It's such a gentle voice. I could have just kept scrolling and forgotten about it, but I just couldn't shake it off because it was so gentle, so compassionate. I had to stop scrolling. I'm like,
It's so poignant.
yeah, whoa, what was that? And at that point, I just could not. I mean, you know how it is. It's like someone opened the window,
Hmm.
someone let in a ray of light into my space, and I just could not shake that off.
And it
And
cascades through the rest of yourself in the process. It takes time, but it
yep.
does, right?
Yeah. And here's where, to your listeners, I want to say this one thing. We may find ourselves in a space where we are locked out. We may feel that way. Your relationship may not be working for you. Your job is in complete disarray. Spiritually, you're completely gone. Addictions are at your all-time high. And I think of it in this way, what has happened to me. I was swinging on a very extreme end of my life, and I would have pretty much gone in that direction. And once all that energy was released, I went into another extreme. And now where I am at is finding back my way to the middle ground.
Hmm.
But because I had nothing to do, I mean, all my energies were put into everything I could find my hands on. And here's the next thing: you don't need to know the whole way. You don't need to know the whole route, right? So for me, it was just doing the next thing, which was a simple course, which cost me about $8 on Udemy. But the value of that course, just putting myself through the process of questioning and inquiring myself, helped me release some of my emotional crap, right?
Hmm.
And the next thing comes from that course. I find a reference to a book. I pick that book up. I find another reference to a book, and here The book I'm talking about, I just got so curious about this book, and I think we spoke about this earlier. I got super curious about this book, and I said, you know what? I think I'm going to go and buy this book. I just thought about buying this book. I didn't go and buy it. And the very next day, the book shows up at my doorstep through Amazon. And I'm surprised. I open it and there's a note by a friend stating that it's a gift for me. And I just called her and I said, hey, Aish, like, you sent me this book. Thank you. First of all, thank you. Why have you sent me this book? And she says, I don't know. I just thought you might enjoy it. I thought you might like it. I said, okay. There
Yeah, you
was a
put the phone
sign.
down and wow, that was really weird.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
it goes back to that experience you had as a kid with the gentleman who heard the voice and they paid attention. This woman did the same thing, and others do that too.
Mhm.
What's really, and you described the situation impeccably well, in how I believe many have gone through. My wife and I, we'd just been married a couple of years at the time, and it was much different for us. I actually turned to her and when we had the lockdown, and I said, I really hope that this obsession on self-hygiene and sequestration will get people to turn inward and start examining themselves
Yeah.
and who they are, what they believe in, so on and so forth, and then how they want to show up in life as a result of that. And as well as I do from your experience as well, that there was this emergent factor of many who began showing up online looking for others who had experienced the same and looking at better ways of learning how to work together and actually solving the world problems instead of just looking at them and going, what can we do? Right? So they're actually taking action to do those kinds of things. The wonderful thing for us, it didn't affect us whatsoever. Our lives were the same. My wife's got a piano studio, and I work remotely mostly. And so that wasn't affected. We actually moved into a larger home during the process, right? So there were all these ancillary silver lining benefits that we experienced. And I have to believe that it was because of our mind flow, not mindset, mind flow in the process of just looking and paying attention and keeping those interactions in a positive frame. Now, of course, I had a little background preparation for it as an 18-year-old. My rite of passage in college was a prayer to know truth and being willing to die for it, and then being taken through the process of dying and going into light and beyond, giving my marching orders and coming back. And those marching orders were basically to help facilitate a new world order, and that it would happen during my lifetime. This is what the voice told me, that wasn't mine. And yet 47 years later is when it finally, it hits. And at the beginning of the pandemic, it's like, oh shit, here it is. Now what do I do? Right? The first thing I got to do is get out of my own way.
Yeah.
And relate back to what you're talking about of just let it go, ask the questions, focus your attention, intention, and interaction on the direction that you want to go, and pay attention to what's showing up in front of you. Now,
Absolutely.
how did you do that in transitioning out of that place that you were in, just kind of in that inebriated place, enjoying the virtual reality that you were experiencing? How did you come out of that?
Again, I would say it's all synchronicity at that point. I would have been just like everybody else, believing in what was coming out of the idiot box. And I happened to start learning hypnosis around the same time. And everything that I'm learning, I could just relate with what's happening out in the world. And I'm like, guys, this is exactly what I'm learning. This is what is hypnosis. We are being hypnotized and kept in a certain trance. And I could just sit back and watch the whole show from a distance. Like every time people had to be put on an alert, the news would just be pumped up. People would get scared, masks would go up, lockdowns would get intensified. And when they want to relax it, they will relax the news. People get more relaxed. Shops are opening, market is opening, masks are down. And it's almost like someone putting a control knob in their hands. And I'm like, I'm studying this stuff. I'm processing this myself right now. And this is a proper trance. This is by definition trance.
Right. And we're in a trance and dance now, which kind of the play on the transcendence, right?
Yeah.
And it's based from my experience. I learned early on a book called None Dare Call It Conspiracy that came out in the 70s that kind of laid out a plan. And then it seemed like there were cycles of, okay, how can we ramp up the fear knob for humanity and order to manage and control them more? Howard Bloom wrote a book called The Lucifer Principle. He also wrote The Global Brain, was another one of his books. And in the Lucifer Principle, he did a scientific study of history, which revealed how people, small groups, some individuals, manipulated masses by telling lies and controlling the media stream, whether it be a town crier or the internet. Doesn't really matter, but they tell them over and over and over again. When they control the media stream, people are going to end up believing it because that's all they hear. Right. The same thing happens in divorces where parents don't get along and the wife or husband, belittles the other towards the kids, and then the kids grow distance toward the other as a result. That kind of stuff is unnecessary, and it is not just devices, it's destructive. Right. And it feeds that, oh, we got to find an enemy somewhere so we can go destroy them, instead of seeing the other enemy as yourself. Right? Why would you want to destroy yourself? Because based on the Namaste and La Catch, we're all the same, right? Wouldn't we want to treat each other with love, honor, respect? The diversity in that perspective is embraced and can fulfill its purpose, whatever that may be. Right?
That is true.
Now, in your coaching practice and in your building, you began to talk about where it was going and how you perceived and connected with others in the ability of being able to step back and take the view, right? And then choosing where to enter in again. How is that process for you? What are the things that you look for? What have you found in others that they attempt to look for in the emergence in this new time, if you will?
I look for what is alive in the other person and help them see that. Oftentimes, just like I was, people tend to forget that there is something alive in them because they're just stuck in labels and ideas in their head, and they forget to connect and reconnect with that alive part in them. And how I do that is by first connecting with what's alive in me. They get to see it.
What is alive in you? Can you even define it?
I can't.
Then how does it feel? What are the things? What's the evidence, the unpacking that becomes that visceral experience? How can you describe that? So, because it's unfamiliar to most, right?
Yeah.
An unknown factor, could be scary. I kind of call it spooky cool, right? Because it's full of awe and mystery, and you never know, right? There's just this anticipation of it, right? So how do you share that in yourself? What have you been able to track, I guess, in that ultimate observance of the process?
Hmm.
in order to be able to then further lock into it and repeat it. Because it's like scientific method, right? It's a repeatable process that we can all use.
It is. It is. And which is why I say that I can do this in one conversation. And I think you've already answered that question while you're talking about your relationship with your spouse. It's being vulnerable, right? Having the courage to be vulnerable about your needs. And spooky cool sounds great because that's totally my jam, right? Spooky cool. Depending on the level of conversation I'm having, even outside of a client therapist relationship, I've had people ask me, like, how are you so unabashed about speaking about your sexuality and your background and stuff like that? And I'm like, it's easy when you don't have different parts inside of you fighting for space, fighting to be in the spotlight. There is just one person here, and I'm done splitting myself. However, I do have access to different ranges of me, if you know what I mean. If I have to be
I think I
firm,
do, but unpack that a little bit for the
yeah,
audience, if you would.
yeah, if I have to be firm in a certain setup, in a certain conversation, I can step into that role and be firm, be decisive, be quite bold. And if I have to be gentle and kind and come from this place of absolute vulnerability, I can do that as well. And these are just tools, a whole range, not a binary, the whole range accessible to me. And yet I'm not attached to any of them. They're just my tools. I can always step back like the actor in the green room, going back and taking off the makeup and realizing that I'm just playing all these roles. And inviting, thus by doing this, inviting the other person into that space of the green room, letting them know that this is just all the roles you're playing. You cannot be defined by me or by you. You just have to observe yourself.
Yeah,
Right?
that's awesome. And you're right. We have this, I call it being a mini Hatma, right?
Yeah.
And it's practical mysticism.
Mhm.
Because you do have that wide range. And one of the things that happened to me, I went through a horrific divorce, corporate expulsion, church expulsion, right around my 30th year, right? And so I put up the question, okay, how can I use this to have some fun with, right? And share it with others. And I came up with this out of the blue, right? Kind of, we're talking about those types of non-local experiences, right? Where you just get that thought, okay, go try this. And the thought was using a three-piece suit as a metaphor and taking it off and talking about transformation, right? Nothing else, just that. So I'm like, okay. So I tried out in front of a group of people at a friend of mine's home that he had gatherings, 30, 35 people. And I've got a set, I'm not full money underneath, obviously. I've got another set of artsy fartsy clothes on underneath it, but I do it. And I talk about taking the coat of armor and untying the knots and divesting ourselves and all that. And I have no idea what I'm going to say.
Wow.
Right. I just get up and do it just because I could. Right. Why not? What's the worst that could happen? I could be a fool. Well, I'm used to playing a fool and I have fun with that. So I just had to be really loose. So in doing that, it was a hit. I was asked to do it at a larger event from, I don't know, 250 people. And the guy that introduced me called me the stripper in the beginning. So it's on YouTube. It was in 1991. And I just have fun talking about the process. And it helped me make my own transition from a place of really deep pain and suffering and feeling betrayed and all of those kinds of things, from a spouse, and move forward.
Yeah.
And the early version of this was called One World. And so I started that during that time as well, to talk to people just like I'm doing now, to find out how they got through stuff and compare my own process. And we don't do that, right? So part of what I'm hoping in the mission of One World, the New World, is to be able to talk about these kinds of things with others now that we're a little bit older and maybe a bit more wise. Sometimes I wonder, right? Um, and yet we can share from that
Hmm.
place and reflect, generatively speaking, and even apocalyptically sometimes, where we peel back the layers to allow others to kind of peer in and so, oh wow, that's pretty cool. How can I do that? And can I do that? And yes, you can. Right?
Yeah.
You have
Yeah.
permission. You're the only one that
Absolutely.
can give it to you.
Absolutely. And what stood out for me over there is the fact that you mentioned in your pain, you decided to have fun. It's almost like taking some sort of a kinky pleasure instead of being upset about the whole thing, which is also fine. It's okay to feel your emotions,
Oh,
and it's
absolutely,
perfectly good to
absolutely.
do that. And there
You
is
have
one
to
way of doing,
begin with.
there's one way of doing it where you beat yourself for feeling those emotions, for feeling miserable. And the other way of doing it is actually having fun with those sensations, right? And this is one of the things that I get to do with my clients. Just this morning, I was talking to someone from Prague, this beautiful woman who had just come through. Um, she's afraid to simply get attention, and she's an entrepreneur, so she has to be on camera, much like this, right?
Right.
And her connection with attention was the fact that her father would talk down on her every time he gave her attention, which was otherwise not available to her. So
Oh
attention meant
yeah.
intimidation, being cornered, right? So I took her right there, and in the end I said, you have all my attention right now. And all of her physical sensations just came rushing in. What is alive in the other person?
Mhm.
So she's feeling all of her belly having this knot, and her face just completely became red, just flushed, right? And she's having tears. But as we're talking, she's saying that she began to realize that she's also having fun in a sort of a kinky way. The
Because it was
sensations can
safe.
be
There was no
fun.
threat.
There you go. Exactly. And that's how the subconscious mind, or the inner mind, realizes that, hey, it's okay to put the guards down. This is just another bunch of sensations I can handle. In
Mhm.
fact, I'm the one who's creating it myself, right?
Right, right, exactly. What's
So,
funny, and I've researched a lot of different areas. I had a good friend that had a doctorate in parapsychology, and
mhm.
it was in my phase where I was really questioning whether psychic attacks were real or not.
Yeah. Mhm.
And then I had one, and in talking with him, his specialty was demonology, witchcraft, and sorcery. And he
Mm,
didn't go there to study it to use it. He went there to study it so he would know how to help others
mm,
defend themselves, right?
mm.
And the bottom line was, he says, you can't, there's no defense. You have to simply let go. The more you try to defend yourself, the more power you give it, because you're fighting against something instead of embracing it. If you
Yes.
embrace it and let go, it'll pass through you. And 9 times out of 10, it'll reflect back on the person who's sending it. And you can actually see it happen sometimes, right?
Yeah,
Pearl, what a pearl.
absolutely.
And that was during that same period that I, did the suit trick thing. That's what I call it. Uh, Euphemistically, I suppose. Those kinds of instances, though, we become so deathly afraid of giving ourselves permission, right? To let go of the constraints that others and self have put on us, because we've generally accepted those constraints from others and then built it into our own belief system. And as you know, belief system is just a bunch of BS anyway. Why not have an experience system? Right?
Absolutely.
Test it.
Yeah.
Let go of all the other stuff. test the things that you and I are talking about and see how it works for you. Right?
Yeah.
We're living proof of it. Are we, do we sound like we're liars? Right? And it's fun.
Well, a lot of people might want to be inclined to think that we are lying, and then that's the reason why I leave social proof on my social media account. Hey, watch people, coming back on video and saying that this is work for them. Speaking of belief system as bullshit, I think I would
Yeah.
like to highlight this part. When you mentioned about experience system, I so feel aligned with that, because it's been my experience. Having being raised Catholic, the whole idea was be careful of the heathens, right?
Right.
Especially, there was a phase in my teenage years. Your mind is only open to what your confines are. So although I rebelled against the Catholic Church, my confines were still Christianity. So I moved into Protestant church, and in that too, in a more cultish, small house group sort of a church,
Mhm.
not the main denominations. And so the idea of heathens being demonic and all sorts of negative entities being there, so do not go there, do not try this, don't do this, don't do yoga, don't do meditation, this is all empty in your mind stuff, is just demonic stuff, right? And so here I am, a guy who is in his 30s, sitting in my room and still feeling the fear quite viscerally in my body when I'm trying to close my eyes and concentrate at night, because
And steeped in a tradition in the culture you're in that is tens of thousands of years old.
old, but it's demonic, so don't go there, right?
Right.
And here's what I did then. I mean, anyways, my back was against the wall. I was feeling cornered with all of my circumstances, and said, you know what? This is the path that has come to me. Demon or not, I'm going to go through with this, right? Experience it for myself and stop just believing for once. And it was quite an uphill trek for me then. And I realized that these fears may seem silly just for even your listeners to listen to these things. But for me, to sit down in that dark room, and I would deliberately put the lights off because I wanted to face my fears. So if a demon comes, let's see what they do. What's the worst that can happen? Let's see.
Good for
And
you.
yeah, that's been my practice now. I put the lights off and I do meditation. I really enjoy it, right? So experience showed me otherwise.
Nothing to fear.
Belief kept me, what is belief if not a decision to stop exploring?
Right. Right. Like
Experience
putting a
is,
label on or a
yeah,
title or a name to something. It puts a box around it.
yeah. It's like, some parents do this to their children, saying, right, you were, a stock brought you and dropped you in the house, because they don't want to explain beyond that point,
Right.
and that's it. Right.
Yeah. How naive.
Yeah. And so for me, looking back, I almost laugh at it when I think about how I was scared of all these entities. And now when I think about it, as you said, entities or not, and I do understand that there's a spectrum of things going on. There is all of these different energies, but ultimately, if we can just calm ourselves down, really be still and know who you are, right? Know that I am Lord. If we can really calm ourselves down, we realize that we are, in fact, the direct image of all that there is. And all that there is contains everything in itself, including entities and what have you. So why are we afraid? And that sort of explains what your friend is saying about just let it go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because someone who is powerful enough, in all humility, can accept that I don't need to fight this. This will pass right through.
And it would seem by doing so that you acquiesce to a greater part of you that's connected not only in this world, but many others as well. And that, in essence, in my experience, leads you towards a more perfected form, fit, and function in the world, which brings you that joy, the happiness, the fulfillment, the service capacity, right? That we, at least some are imbued with, that kind of keep it under bushel basket for a while until they can't anymore because the universe won't let you, right? It's
Yeah.
like, oh, come on, you got to wake up and move on. So in the waking up and moving on, we're kind of coming on the close. What if there was something that you could suggest to our audience of how they can experience a simple difference in their life that they could experiment with to begin to create that experience system? What would that be? What's worked for you?
For me, it was through suffering, through an extreme point of pain. And I think because I used to be the kind of guy who needed that kind of, you know,
Push through the pain.
crushing, crushing to come down to my knees, because I just declared myself to be an agnostic atheist for 10 years, just to have fun. So, but depending on where you are, and I'm talking to the audience directly, for me, it was pain because that's where I was. You may not be in the same place. For you, it could be just curiosity to go somewhere. And as long as you just surrender to that strange feeling that you have deep down, way in the back of your head, where there's a calling inside, there is something truly alive and intelligent in you. If you could cut out those distractions and sit with yourself, and this is easy, you don't need to go and meditate for 12 years to hear that part of you. And just a few minutes with yourself in nature, and being grounded under the sunlight, with the waters, on the earth directly, just that connection. And in today's world, this is hard because, well, we have this crazy stuff in our hands all the time and all sorts of distractions. So just a few minutes of doing that and asking that question, like in so many books it has been said, seek and you shall find, and knock and the door shall be open, and ask and you shall receive. This is as simple as that, because whether you go to it through pain or through reconnection out of your own volition, the point is it's still the same thing. It's a sincere asking, it's a sincere seeking and knocking that gets you that response. You may not get the response instantly, or you may get it instantly, but you will start seeing synchronicities, you'll start seeing insights coming to you. And here's the little secret. When you get these signs, do your bit to appreciate that and take action on it. That little course that just cost me $8 on Udemy, that was me taking the first crumb that came towards my way, which made me eligible for the whole piece of bread. And when I grabbed that piece and I ate that down, then I was given a cake. And when I ate the cake, I got the pastry. And you can just add this up and it goes pretty fast from there. But the test is, are you going to take that opportunity? And life truly is throwing away opportunities at all times. Udemy was there all along. That course had been there, sitting over there for years. Where was I?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So regardless of what brings you to that realization of, if it's this conversation that you're watching between Zen and I, if you could just allow yourself to just be with yourself, awkward as it may seem, just talk to yourself and make that inquiry. So where do I go from here? Give me a sign. Now what do I do next? I give up, I surrender, show me. And don't take my word for it. See it for yourself. open yourself up to the possibilities, and it can happen. Things can shift pretty drastically, pretty fast. I am in a profession that I had no skill set for 2.5 years ago. And some of the people that I work with, people who come up to me, have been doing hypnosis for last 15 years, and they ask me how I do what I do. This is the magic of practical alchemy. You combine that, all of your skill sets that you've been picking up, it just turbojets into the space very fast. And that's a potential that I don't think I hold, because we are all special. All of us have this. Like, do we tap into that deeper layers of us? Are we just living at this epidermis skin level? That's what I was doing for 30 plus years, and I don't wish to do it anymore. I absolutely want to go all the way in and spend everything that this body has to offer before I leave this vehicle. It's like really sitting in an Iron Man suit, if you will, and just using it to walk to the park when you can fly around.
Exactly. Well, we've been flying around quite a bit today, Sonny, and I do appreciate your time, your wisdom, your insight, your humor, and your vulnerability. And thank you for being who you are. I am very grateful for that, and I'm sure our audience is too. And in that merging of the inner and outer, the breadcrumbs turned into the marriage feast.
Oh yeah.
You've had that wedding of the inner and the outer now.
And it's a perpetual feast, and we are all partaking in it together. So on that,
Absolutely.
in that feast, you get to meet crazy people and lovely people and amazing people like Zen, who have had their own journey, right? Like you.
And you too.
So yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. It's been a pleasure, Zen. The conversation just mind flow, right? Flowing.
Yeah, it's like
Beautiful.
old friends that hadn't seen each other for a while.
For a while. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. And namaste,
Namaste.
and
Namaste.
in la catch. And thanks for sticking with us for this episode of One World. I'm sure you had a wonderful time. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and I will see you next time.